I have the added challenge of presenting two countries within my 10-minute slot. I thought Matthew and Stephen will be kind enough to give me okay, thank you, Ben. Although my talk will be focusing mainly on the two countries that I'm most familiar with, Nauru and Tuvalu, a lot of the common challenges in these two countries are very much relevant to other smaller states, as we have heard, like in Kiribati and some other smaller states. Typically, these microstates have very small populations. For Nauru, it used to be more than 10,000 when it had the mining industry booming, but it repatriated most of its foreign workers in the mid-2000s, and so now it's stabilizing at 10,000, and the same with Tuvalu. These economies have very low economic growth, economic output. Over the years, Tuvalu has reached about up to 50 million worth of economic output, and similarly for Nauru, although as many of you know, Nauru used to be the most wealthiest state in the region when it was had a very booming phosphate export industry. Just looking at the ADB figures, we can tell that these economies have very volatile economic growth rates year on year. The effects of the global financial crisis still impacted these economies even after 2008, as we can see both incurring negative rates of growth in 2009 and 2010, and slowly recovering from 2011 onwards. Nauru was severely impacted more than Tuvalu, mainly because of its phosphate industry. At the time was struggling to produce the amount of tonnage for exports for various internal factors. And for 2012 and onwards, estimates have been forecasted that for Nauru in particular, because of the uptake in the phosphate mining industry, it would have significantly higher rates of growth. Although in the latest economic forecasts that the ADB have just announced, launched this morning, they have revised downward Nauru's forecast growth for 2013 and 2014 to 4.5% and 6% respectively, rather than the early estimates of 8%, mainly because of the delays associated with fully rolling out the regional processing center for the asylum seekers in Nauru, and also due to some reduction in the phosphate exports, because some of the machinery is being used in this refugee center. These economies are typically consisting of very large public sectors. For Tuvalu, for instance, 80% of GDP constitutes the public sector, with very small private sector. A fairly limited, narrow economic resource base, apart from Nauru that has had this natural resource, phosphate. There isn't much else. For Tuvalu, the main sources of income, fisheries licenses, trust fund earnings, and of course foreign aid. And as we have heard from Kiribati, to some extent the remittances from seafarers and some seasonal workers in New Zealand. Both countries use the Australian dollar. It has pros and cons. The pros that there's no need to manage the supply of money and interest rates, but then it limits the ability of the government to manage the macroeconomic policy. So what are some of the challenges, key challenges? As we have seen in the chart earlier, growth has gradually returned following the GFC, but remains low. And if we have to take out the asylum seeker contribution to Nauru, it would moderate it to a fairly low level. The demand for seafarers, for instance, in Tuvalu remains low, hasn't recovered. It used to be contributing quite a bit to overall economic activity in the early 2000s, about 30%, and now it's hovering around 8%. The strong Australian dollar keeps inflation under check, but it contributes to a widening current account deficit. Also, the exchange rates between the Australian dollar and the US also has implications for the income that these countries receive abroad, especially the US-denominated income, and they are mainly in fishing license fees, the .tv for Tuvalu, and a number of other factors. Tuvalu has this Tuvalu Trust Fund, which provides a financial income, long-term financial security for the country. I'd like to take a minute or two to talk about this Tuvalu Trust Fund, because it is quite unique in the sense that it was established under international agreement with 3 other development partners, its traditional donors, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, where they agreed with Tuvalu at the time in the mid-80s, soon after Tuvalu became independent, that there wasn't any financial security for Tuvalu. There was no economic outlook prospect for Tuvalu, and therefore they agreed with Tuvalu at the time to set up a investment fund using their own bilateral assistance. So each of these 3 partners contributed about 8 million each back in 1987 to set up, with Tuvalu contribution, an initial fund that was also managed by a board of directors representing these 4 partner countries. And it had a very stringent management structure where the rule is that Tuvalu cannot draw down from the return from the fund only after it has been maintained for inflation increases. So, for instance, in the years following the GFC, or prior to that, the fund has been performing fairly well. The market value exceeding the maintained adjusted for inflation level. But following the GFC, that for the 4 years since the GFC, there was no return because the maintained value was above the market value. But there was another innovation that Tuvalu came up with. In the years that it had profits, it was able to create another sub-account within the main account of the trust fund and plow in all those earnings and able to grow with the main capital of the fund. So in the years that the fund wasn't making any distribution, the government was still able to draw from that other B account. Now, so given all these challenges, what are some of the policy options and instruments that the government the 2 governments could rely on? First and foremost is, of course, maintenance of macroeconomic stability. And given the fact that both countries use the Australian dollar, that renders monetary policy really non-existent effectively. So fiscal policy becomes the main policy instrument by which these economies can maintain their macroeconomic growth parameters. What Tuvalu and Nauru have been doing these recent years is to have a balanced budget. Effectively, they cannot borrow to finance any budget deficits. So that limits their ability in that regard. Tuvalu recently has been able to run core budget deficits, but because of the trust fund buffer account, it was able to finance those deficits. Unlike in the case of Nauru, it had to ensure that it puts out and implements a balanced budget approach year in, year out. In terms of public sector performance, there have been a number of reforms undertaken both by these countries, especially in terms of the private enterprises, the SOEs. A number of these SOEs, as we've heard in a number of presentations, not performing, and there have been reforms to make them more efficient and increase their productivity. In the case of Nauru, there have been a number of public sector reform programs in terms of the procurement, the government procurement that has been outsourced to independent entity, also public financial management reform following the PEFA analysis, the public expenditure and accountability assessment that was carried out in 2010 that identified a number of financial management improvements, and the government has been working through those public sector reform. In terms of private sector growth, both countries are undertaking taxation reform. Tuvalu have increased their VAT from 4% to 7% and strengthening their tax compliance. Nauru doesn't have a tax, income tax or business tax, but they have been looking at a possibility of introducing a comprehensive taxation reform. In the case of Nauru, the availability of financial services and credit has been limited. There is no bank in Nauru since the collapse of its economy in the early 2000s. But there are measures afoot now to bring in a private banking operator. Very quickly on the last 2 points. Tuvalu and Nauru have taken initiatives to be able to maximize opportunities for their sovereign status. For the case of Tuvalu, it had the .tv, which was leased out to international company to run, and Tuvalu was able to get a return from that, and more recently engaging with on a diplomatic level together both Tuvalu and Nauru with some of the Russian blocs, and in return Nauru was able to get a lot of money from that. And finally, in terms of labor migration and seasonal worker scheme, that is something that would certainly contribute to these economies' performance. Thank you.